from India, a refugee from Iran, a Mexican whose grandmother picked cotton in California, a Canadian whose family was in the had a private business. But we selected them not because of their particular backgrounds, but we selected them for their excellence. And the fact that they came from different backgrounds has made us a more successful kind of organization. That, in my mind, is a very appealing way to think about diversity, as opposed to saying, let's look at the percentage of various groups, of different ethnic groups in the country, and then let's force design an organization so we match that collection.
For sure, you hear that sort of Noah's Ark frame, that if we have a certain set of a certain type, then our problems will be solved, which does not necessarily seem to be the case. But you see this, really, the benefits of being dynamism, better decision-making, a better reflection of what society looks like within businesses.
And also, there is a fairness component. My point is, I like a world in which someone who started out with disadvantages gets a closer look than someone who had everything sort of handed to them. I think that seems right to me.
So I think it's so fascinating. You've just articulated very well what the benefits are. So how do you feel about being framed and these headlines saying that you're an anti-DEI activist?
The short form description of me is never really an accurate one, I would say.
Right.
I'm more nuanced. Look, I think I certainly want to be perceived the way that I actually am, as opposed to some caricature of myself. And also, I think the ideas are important, and if you want to challenge them, I'm always up for the debate. But we are in a world today where if you challenge conventional wisdom, or you take on sensitive topics where you're at risk of being quote-unquote canceled, you can be accused of being a racist. Yeah. You can be accused of lots of things. And I think that's led to a shutdown of kind of free speech generally, which I think is a big negative, for society.
So yeah, it does seem a factor of our current era that arguments get sort of flattened and oversimplified and made more vicious and polarized. And so how do you feel about your arguments being treated like that? Do you feel that's okay as long as I get the job done, as long as I get my goals met at Harvard or any future campaign? Or does this bother you? Does it bother you to be oversimplified in the press like this?
Of course. But I'm a big boy. It's okay. And also, I think, I'm a very fortunate person in many ways. But one of them is I don't have to worry about my employment. And today, if you work for a company and you are unhappy with, you want to comment about something in politics, for example, and you do it on Twitter, you can end up losing your job for expressing your views. And I think the world is a better place where all views can be heard, can be assessed, can be debated, but where you're not shouted down or canceled, or worse, you become unemployed because you have a controversial opinion about gender or whatever the topic.
It's true that the more of us have the opportunity to have a voice and make our views heard, but that's not proportionate, right? Some people's voices are boosted more than others. So how do you think about your voice and your power and maybe your responsibility in this realm and how you use your voice, especially given what we've been talking about how it may become distorted and your arguments may become more flattened and reduced to something that they were not?
So one of the criticisms of me during the Harvard campaign is some professor from Yale said, you shouldn't listen to him simply because he's a rich guy. And I totally agree with that. I shouldn't have more voice by virtue of net worth. But I don't think that I do. My Harvard campaign was not a disinvestment, or I never said anything about making or not making a donation to Harvard. I don't think they should listen to me more or less, whether I have been a contributor or not. I think what's given me voice and followers, if you will, is just my willingness to share points of view on ideas. And people think those ideas are interesting, I get followership. If they weren't concerned with what I had to say, they would not follow me. But I don't think I have more voice. Maybe I'm naive by this, but I think the reason, plenty of other people in my industry, similar economic circumstance, have very little voice because they've not put themselves out there, they've not shared their views, and I've done that in some depth. I've been criticized for writing the longest posts in history.
Yeah.
But at least, you know what I feel with particularity, I guess.
And you certainly invite disagreement, you invite debate.
Yeah, I put ideas out there to learn, not because I'm trying to impose my will on others. I actually read the comments, even the mean ones, because I think and actually my approach to X, I should call it X, is I follow people on both extremes of many important debates, and I try to follow the most articulate, seemingly intelligent ones, and that's how I find the truth, right? Just following people that support my beliefs, I don't feel like I'm going to learn very much. Again, going back to the importance of viewpoint diversity at universities, if you're not hearing, if you're 18 years old and you show up on the Harvard campus, you want to hear the full spectrum of views from progressive to the most conservative.
Right.
To find truth, right? That's what education is, about finding the truth. How can you find the truth if there's a limit to what speech is acceptable?
So you'll put a provocative position out there, and then you will ask to be challenged, ask to be corrected, and you will look for information that challenges what you thought already.
I don't necessarily think it's provocative, right? I try to put out my points of view on things. Other people may find them provocative, but I certainly welcome criticism and a alternative point of view. That's how I learn.
All right, so let's go back to this topic of influence. You said you don't think you have disproportionate influence. Certainly, something I hear and read about, and that is a big topic in current discourse, is the excessive influence of wealthy people on our democracy, on technology. The speculation goes on. Do you think this is a legitimate source of concern? And if so, are you part of this problem or not?
Yeah, so let me sort of kind of address that two ways. One, I think the notion that you can spend an unlimited amount of money on political campaigns, in effect, through PACs and otherwise, and you can even do it anonymously, I think is a disaster. And so that's wrong. I do think wealthy people can have more influence, absolutely. The point I was making was I think the influence I've had has not come from because I spent a lot of money on an XYZ campaign, but rather because I put out an idea that has impact. The tweet I wrote on DEI, which is 5,200 words or whatever, has been viewed 36 million times. It's probably the most viewed long tweet. maybe the only long tweet, but it's had an impact. I happened to bump into a governor who said it had an impact on changes in policy they made, but I think it had nothing to do with how many stocks I own or anything like that.
I didn't hear an answer to the question. Do you think this excessive influence of rich people in society is a genuine problem, or is it exaggerated?
Look, I think the notion that someone can spend several $100 million on various campaigns at state levels and otherwise, and impact the politics of attorneys general on the country, I think is not a good thing. The democratic process should be democratic, right? In order for it to be democratic, it's kind of one man, one vote. Now, all that being said, I look at the Elon Musk of the world, and the fact that he had the resources, profits he made from PayPal is what enabled him to launch Tesla, and SpaceX. No venture capitalist would have put up the capital to launch Tesla. It was the $100 million from Elon that made that happen. I think, Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin Avi's talking about, what could be accomplished with $4 trillion. The fact that people have $100-something billion are prepared to invest that on space exploration, I think, is a very positive thing for society. It does have influence otherwise. What I worry about is, the political stuff. That I think that the Supreme Court decision needs to be reversed.
All right.
Ironically, it was Citizens United is the decision, right? And it's disunited the citizens. Yeah.
So voices legitimate within reason. We need to have.
No. Voice is legitimate without reason, right? Free speech. Share your views and let the most powerful ideas capture the minds.
Okay, and you believe that is happening?
Actually, I'm a big fan of X. I think it really is a open free speech platform, and I've learned a lot, and it's affected my views, my politics, my insights, and I think it's one of the few places you can go and have a true free speech platform. The negative is, of course, you're going to confront hate speech and vile speech and things that are the detritus of free speech. But I still think it's a very, very good thing. I no longer rely on just the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Economist, right? Or and CNN or whatever, right. Fox News, whatever media you follow. And I think being able to kind of custom select interesting insights is good for humanity.
Amazing. We need to wrap up. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Welcome to another episode of Palantir Weekly. This is one of the most special episodes we've ever had on this podcast. This podcast is dedicated to one company over the past 2 years. And on episode number 118, we have the honor and privilege of having the CTO of Palantir, Shyam Sankar, join us. Shyam, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I'm a little starstruck. I'm used to seeing you guys, on a screen here. So it's great to be in real life.
Okay, so we're at this big conference all about AI. I have a couple questions we just want to get your thoughts on in terms of what's been happening with Palantir and the trajectory of the company. Boot camps have been pretty much exploding. You guys just had Q1 earnings, and you reported some amazing numbers in regards to boot camp growth. A couple years ago, Arnie and I were on this podcast, and we were struggling to figure out how a company that has such an amazing product is struggling to sell that product. And obviously, selling SaaS products are hard, but you guys figured it out, and figured it out in a pretty profound way. What can you say about AIP growth in terms of the boot camp strategy, and how do you think that's going to define the next decade for Palantir's growth?
At the risk of starting from the beginning, a little philosophically, I think what's so powerful about the ChatGPT moment is that it recalibrated the expectations in the market. I think in many ways, ChatGPT is not directly relevant to the enterprise. But suddenly people are feeling like, wait a second, my software is supposed to work. This is possible. Why am I not getting more? And I think that recalibration really started in COVID, where people were like, I've spent $10 billion on IT. I had a small disruption to my supply chain. Why is it the only thing I'm proud of having invested in is Zoom? So what am I getting for my IT money? And so the boot camps, the reason they're really working is in 8 hours, you're able to understand what could be done. I can't tell you how many anecdotes are roughly of the shape, I got more done in these 8 hours than I did in the past X months. And you can't unsee that. As a user, you may not decide to leave that and buy the very next second, but now that is the standard by which you are going to judge every piece of software that is put in front of you. Right.
American prosperity is national security. That was the name of your keynote. Could you better elaborate what do you mean with that? Why it is important, and how can you implement this concept into the product, the strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's the way of thinking about the company. 50% of the company is focused on government, directly protecting national security in the context of Western nations and allies. The other 50% is focused on commercial. We can look at Korea and Vietnam. In 1950, they roughly had the same GDP per capita. South Korea, capitalist, Vietnam not. Now the GDP per capita is 5x in South Korea than it is in Vietnam. A big part of what we care about is raising the human condition. So freedom and prosperity are the unifying themes of what we work on. And it's important to remember that national security is a means to an end. And that end is to promote freedom and prosperity. We don't do defense for defense's sake. And the opportunity with AI here is, how do we get past the stagnant productivity growth that we have experienced in the West? How do we solve some of the biggest problems we have? I like telling people in healthcare, look, the fact that healthcare costs are rising faster than inflation and GDP, that is an issue for national security. We're not going to be able to afford this level of care. How are we innovating on that? And I think technologies like AIP have a huge role to play there.
Following up on that real quick before getting to the next question, you mentioned in your keynote, which was an exceptional keynote that we had the privilege of just seeing about an hour ago, $100 billion has been allocated to defense tech from the VCs. Now, when you guys were trying to get funded, no VCs would look at you, and then you somehow got the government to fund you. Can you speak a little bit to where you think American dynamism is going in terms of private capital actually coming back to defense tech?
Yeah, and I think coming back is the right way to think about it. One thing people don't realize is in the interwar years between World War I and World War II, it was really private aerospace that was subsidizing the existence of aerospace. Government was essentially kind of trying to drive them out of business, and founders kept pouring capital into this. And the counterfactual, if they hadn't done that, they wouldn't have been able to meet their moment with World War II in order to produce that many airplanes. So what I see is us returning to essentially what the economy used to look like. Bob Noyce, the co-founder of Intel and co-inventor of the transistor, in the 60s, 96% of his revenue was DoD. That's the only people who were buying integrated circuits. But he never let more than 4% of his R&D budget be directly funded by the government, because he, as the inventor, wanted to control the R&D roadmap. And think about how much prosperity the fact that America invented the integrated circuit, and that revolution has brought all of us, the quality of living standard that we've all enjoyed as a consequence of that. So that's where I think these things really come together here.
In terms of Rebellion, so we just saw a partner that you guys worked with on stage in terms of the collaboration from their defense products and your defense products with Gotham. A couple of months ago, I think it was summer 2023, FedStart became a real big thing for the company. And this idea was that you guys went through the hell of 20 years of figuring out how to sell to the government, how to make the connections, how to navigate the politics and bureaucracy. And now you've got all these smaller startups that are getting the hundreds of billions of dollars from the Andreessen Horowitz of the world, that are trying to find the next Palantir, the next Anduril, but they're not accredited and they don't have the sort of safety ramifications to get into the government. How big do you think that can become over the long term in terms of getting companies the access they need to the DoD, and what do you think it means for the business at large?
And I recognize I have more to say about FedStart from your first question. So I think the way to think about it is FedStart is the entry-level product, if you will. Look, I'm a new entrant. I have customer interest. How do I go get revenue from that? Well, it's going to turn out that you need to solve these accreditation problems that I can make go away very quickly. Right? Okay. Now, there's a broader play here, which is if you really think about what does the government want. For each one of these programs in government, which there are hundreds, maybe potentially thousands, they want what they call a multi-vendor big tent ecosystem. They want to be able to have lots of people come in and compete and provide innovation and have an incentive, as opposed to the old legacy model of a single big monolithic prime. Everyone is aligned on that vision. How are you going to do that technically? The way that they do that without something like mission manager, as we call it, is with labor. You hire a system integrator, you pay them by the hour, they try to manage through process this whole sort of multi-vendor Big Ten ecosystem. But the reason we got there first is because it may look like I'm shipping 4 platforms, but my lived reality as CTO is that I have 150 software development teams building 5,000 microservices, deploying some collection of those services to 1,000 production environments, 100 of which are air-gapped. That is a multi-vendor Big Ten ecosystem, and I solved that problem with software. And in the same way that Amazon built really exquisite first-party software to sell books, and then now that powers half the internet, I think this software infrastructure with Rubix and Apollo, that with the OSDK that we call Mission Manager, can power the success of these defense tech companies. It will get them to revenue quicker. It will power the programs that the governments really want to make them competitive and scalable and to meet this moment. And if you go along with the other things I've been saying, that software is the unique American advantage, we can field a lot of software to our warfighters between now and any potential conflict. You can't field that much exquisite hardware between now and then. How many B-21s are going to be available, right? But this is our unique strength, and we can leverage Rebellion. We can leverage the breadth of modern American software companies to have a real impact.
We are here at AI Expo, and there are a lot of companies and a huge Palantir booth, where we had the opportunity to have experience directly with AAP in different settings and different use cases. Among the 100,000 things you can do with AAP, what is the one that excites you the most?
That's like picking amongst your children. I think it's a little bit hard, but I'm very excited about the ability for the integration, if you will, between builders writing AIP logic functions that show up in something like Gaia that a normal everyday user is going to be able to use to execute their work. So I mentioned this on the earnings call where a builder in DoD created an AIP logic function that took the targeting cycle down from 6 hours to 10 seconds. I mean, that's advantage right there. And so if you can repeat that even 50 times, I think that's what transformation looks like.
Sean, we have about 10 minutes left. Can you tell us a little bit? I think a lot of people that listen to the podcast would enjoy listening from your own perspective. What was it like starting this job, being the first employee, forward deployed engineer, and now you're the CTO of a very large and very important company? Like, do you kind of feel like a rock star, even a little bit? Like, even just a little bit?
No, I mean, no. It feels, it's like been a continuum. 18 years in some sense both feels like the blink of an eye. And the only thing I can remember, I don't remember what life before Palantir really was. I mean, it's so rewarding day to day to work with the users we have, to work backwards from the problems that they face across government and commercial work. And so I think the real meta reflection on the journey of Palantir is like, it's about learning. Karp's favorite business movie is the 36 Chambers of Shaolin. And it took me a long time to really understand why. And it's just like, you're just trying to earn your way into the next chamber of understanding how does the world really work? How can we have a greater impact as a consequence of that working? And I feel like I'm still on that journey.
The culture of winning. You wrote a great article a couple of weeks ago, and I really wonder, is there a unique way to win?
I think there's a lot of ways to win, but the unique way to lose is to pretend that the world works a way that it doesn't. To say, like, no, like the world has to work this way because I don't want to live in a world that doesn't work this way. Instead of saying, look, this is how the world works. I've now learned that. My strategy needs to adapt to that reality. And that's why I think elevating, I mean, my own personal experience here is like, I screwed up the primacy of winning. That's why I hold on to it so dearly. So many times in this journey, it's like, but like, I don't want it to work that way. I want it to and it's like, and then you kind of like, that's never going to change. That's a useless way of framing the problem. So like, okay, get back on the horse, figure out how does the world really work? How do I adjust my software and the strategy and how we're going to deploy and what we're learning and how we're promoting people and who we're recruiting so that we keep winning. And I think the reason I emphasize that a lot internally is like, that is one of the chambers for every person to go through. The education system we have, we teach people that the world works a certain way. How quickly are you going to learn it doesn't work that way?
The rise of LLMs, we talked a little bit about AIP boot camps, have basically revolutionized how the world thinks about machine learning, AI, business intelligence. This one talk you did a while ago, your theme was, don't think of LLMs as chat, think of them as compute. Sort of a new form of infrastructure for the entire modern enterprise. The demos Arnie and I saw today were basically, they finally clicked to me why LLMs and AI goes beyond chat. What is your version of LLMs in the enterprise outside of just a chatbot?
I think it's a new way of writing logic, writing functions. It doesn't replace traditional software. It really allows you to address a set of things traditional software couldn't do. And so when you have, this is a simplistic way of thinking about it, but to a first approximation, it's good. LLMs give you infinite on-demand intern capacity. Now, if you stare at the workflow that you're currently trying to solve, you can decomp that workflow into expert reasoning, intern reasoning, traditional software, and AI. Now, how you assemble this into an elegant workflow is the magic of AIP. And you never have that intern level reasoning, and the harder you look at some of these problems, the more you realize how much you can do. Like let's use patient discharge at a hospital. If you've ever had a medical procedure, the worst part is waiting to be discharged. It is a catastrophe. And if you really think about it, the way certainly medicine works is you have this care guideline. You know, they have in English or in some language, human language, they've written down how this should work. Now, how do I take the clinical record, the care guidelines, and understand, is this patient eligible for discharge? Can they go to a discharge lounge, or do I need to occupy this bed? By the way, not only does it suck as the patient to occupy that bed, that means someone else who actually needs care cannot occupy that bed. Right, so there's all these and if you're a nurse, which my mom was, at the end of a 14-hour shift, this is hard to deal with, right? Like, it would be nice to have an army of infinite on-demand interns helping you go through this, making your job more efficient. And I think as you start looking at the landscape, if you're a supply chain manager, if you're in the legal profession, if you're dealing with procurement, there's so many places that you can get leverage on top of this.
In line with what you just said, it seems that models are already a commodity. So I wonder, what people grasp of this idea? Like, do people agree with this idea of the commoditization of the models, or you see some frictions? What is your understanding of what you understand as you, as a CTO, as a company, and what the world still doesn't understand?
Well, to me, this comes back to the primacy of winning. So I think if you look at these models, they are very clearly today powerful interns. They're not going to be a pharmaceutical subject matter expert, a mechanical subject matter expert. Maybe they can be in the future. And when that's in the parametric of knowledge of the models, we'll find ways of leveraging them. But what we very clearly see today is there's a set of things that they can do, and we know how to leverage them for effect. Now, I think some of this comes down to how you define your job. So if you're a data scientist, you really, really need to believe that fine-tuning or custom training models is possible, because otherwise, what is your job? And so this is where you kind of see a lot of people pushing in that direction, where it's not actually clear there's any economic return from doing that. There may be, but why don't you let the use cases take you there, as opposed to the preconceived notion of your job role is. And so I think it's going to open up, one, like with any new technology, there's a part of this that's a little dislocated. You're going to have to redefine your job around what makes sense in this context. But one of the patterns that we've seen, that I think is a secret, if you will, is that one of the most powerful things you can do with these LLMs is incorporate expert feedback, because it's the thing they don't know. Now, you're not going to get the expert feedback through, you can definitely get expert feedback from fine-tuning. But one of the patterns that we're helping people with Build with AIP is injecting the expert feedback back into the prompt in the AIP logic function, structuring that feedback in the ontology so that the function can go query the ontology for past mistakes it's made, past injections of corrections in its mechanical machine reasoning by experts to make better and better decisions.
The AIP developer, anyone can sign up for an account free thing that you guys just launched that's kind of going viral right now on social media. What is that, and why do you think people are excited about it right now?
One of the greatest things for me about AIP is it is for builders. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about, there's this like learning curve. Like the primitives we use, they're not the same as hyperscaler primitives. And you have to kind of put in the time to understand, okay, now that I understand how to solve problems with Foundry or AIP, I'm unleashed. I want to make that as easy as possible. And with our marketplace product, we've been able to package up quick starts, tutorials, reference implementations, and I think we're just at the beginning of that. We're going to start creating a lot more of these things that are responsive to how the patterns we see that are valuable, the patterns that get people over that learning hump as quickly as possible, and allow them to play with it. And I think there's some natural charisma. Everyone wants to build a compelling use case with GPT Vision. Yeah. Great, let me help you do that quickly and easily and experience that through AIP. So I think it's going to be, I really want to start with our existing customers, our existing builders. How do I get more builders with existing customers? How do I help our existing builders do even more? And I think that kind of opens the door to a broader builder ecosystem that I think you guys have been talking about for a while.
A colony of artists. That's how you defined Palantir. And that's an intriguing definition that makes me wonder why it is important to have a colony of artists into tech, which is code. So we should be rigid. Why art?
That's a very important question. I mean, I would say, to give credit where it's due, the artist colony is Karp's philosophy that we've all, built the company around. And it comes from his deep belief that peak talent, is highly asymmetric. There are going to be things you're exceptionally good at and things you are exceptionally not good at. And your ability to succeed in life is going to come down to your know thyself, the Oracle of Delphi. Do you actually understand what your superpowers are? Do you understand what you are so bad at that you shouldn't even be involved with? And that takes a lot of, you have to manage your own ego. There's a learning journey in there. So how do we make that okay? How do we create an environment that maximizes the individual? I don't think you get Monet to be amazing by telling him to paint more like Picasso, right? Like every one of these artists is unique. And you think about the X-Men, they have superpowers, they all had some sort of weird fatal flaw, usually in their personality, something like that. But, in aggregate, they were very, very powerful. And so how do we honor the fact that, no one at Palantir is a solo act. We are a rock band. We play in unison in concert. We all have different instruments. We all have different strengths, and we value that. The other part that I think is really important is it allows you to attract the very best people because they don't want to be confined by some weird preconceived conception of what the role is. They want the role to modulate to what they're great at. And it creates that freedom and prosperity within your role definition.
Okay, Sham, last question for you. First of all, thanks for taking the time for this. This was absolutely amazing to get the privilege to talk to you. What do you think is one misconception people have about either Palantir, leadership, Alex Karp, who's a very eclectic, in his words, eccentric individual that is very polarizing to an extent? Is there anything out there that you want people to know about Palantir, Karp, the entire team, that is something that they don't really understand, that you guys deeply get? And if they were to understand, maybe they would better get the vision of Palantir.
It's so hard. After 18 years, I feel like I'm so steeped in it. It's hard to take a step out of it and say, what don't people get? But I think the thing that they don't understand, because maybe they don't believe it, is that the fundamental challenges that we are solving remain unaddressed in the world.
What do you mean by that? Like,